Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Parul, a PhD student at IIT Gandhinagar, and I'll be moderating today's talk as part of the ongoing Social Justice Seminar series. So, Social Justice Seminar series is at IIT Gandhinagar is an attempt to initiate discussions on the themes of marginalization, exclusion, inequality, and discrimination against the most marginalized and vulnerable societies. We invite speakers to share their research on caste, anti-caste, castelessness, issues concerning indigenous and Adivasi communities, gender, sexuality, class, and language. Our aim is to reach out to a larger audience from various disciplinary backgrounds and offer a platform to engage in critical discussions on social inequality, diversity, and justice. So, it is my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Ms. Cynthia Stephen. She is a poet, an independent academic, media professional, and human rights activist. She's also a gender trainer and gender poverty and development policy researcher with a focus on the empowerment of the women from the marginalized sections. She has pioneered research and writing from the perspective of the marginalized and on the political empowerment of women at the margins of society. Her numerous articles in journals, print, and online are studied in universities around the world. She has also contributed chapters to many books, and her poetry has been received with acclaim. She is the founder director of the Training Educational and Development Services Trust, which works with women in distress. She also has a small publishing and distribution unit, which has the distinction of bringing out translations of books in several languages. So she will be talking for 30 to 35 minutes, and then we will have a round of question and answer followed by and any discussion. So I now request everyone to mute their audio and invite ma'am to start her presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Ambika and team and IIT Gandhinagar for. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. And thank you, IIT Gandhinagar, for inviting me to be a part of the social justice series of lectures and talks. I think it's an important initiative that you all are undertaking because this is exactly the kind of space and arrangement that was lacking all these years. And those of us who have been in the struggle for the last 20, 30 years, first as of course as a woman activist, and later on my Dalit consciousness arose, I can say, and since so for the past 15 years at least, I've been actively engaging with the identity of, or the rather not the identity so much as the perspective, from the perspective of a Dalit woman's experience. And so this has been important because I've always had a voice. I've been a journalist for at least 20, 30 years, 35 years, independent journalist. I also have worked in formally in institutions, but I've been a freelancer, and I also work not in just one but several languages in terms of as a trainer, as a gender trainer. I've traveled across the country because I speak several languages, and there are not, at the time when I was working in gender, there were not very many experts in gender who were capable of speaking in local languages like Kannada and Telugu and Tamil. And so I was always pressed into service, invited to travel. I also work in Hindi very well. And so that has been one of the, that has been the reason why I had a vast experience of traveling, meeting large, diverse groups, being a trainer at different levels. And so that was in the area of gender. Also having grown up in a sort of a rural setting, that gave me some understanding of realities. Being from a Christian community and having experienced a certain kind of marginalization as a result of being from the minority, that has also been an experience. But it was only after I realized that there was a factor of there was something else playing in my life, due to which certain things were not happening. There was some certain puzzling incidences which could not be explained. It was only after the coin dropped that I was being perceived as a Dalit that things began to make sense. So I'll just give one example. This is just there are several examples. I'll give one example. As many of you know, I've been working at a national and international level also with NGOs advocating on women's rights. So I was quite well known to quite of the large funding agencies. So once funding agency was looking for a project officer, so they asked me to send in my CV. And so I was very excited. Now I wouldn't be excited at all. Have an issue about funding, the way funding is utilized by large funding organizations, funders, how the decisions are made. No? That's a story by itself. At any rate, I was excited and happy that, I might be offered a position or at least interviewed. Then I sent in my CV, and then after that, the next time I went, I was expecting a good reception. I expected somebody to, call me for an interview. Nothing happened. I was puzzled. What was this about? Why this disinterest? But after a little thought, I realized the reason. The reason is that I had done. I had a bachelor's degree and I had done a PG diploma in journalism. And after that, I must have had at least around 8 to 10 years experience. So, and I was an accomplished, I had got a very good name in the field. But that was less important. These people did look for a master's degree, which I did not have at that point. Then I had got married just very young, and I had a broken relationship. After that, some years later, I remarried, and I had just had 2 children in quick succession and had a full-time job. So you can imagine, even in that condition, I said, "Oh, these people want an MA. Okay, I'll do it." And that's when I took a master's in women's studies. With great difficulties, in the middle of this, staying up late in the night, getting only 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and I took my master's degree. But I know a lot of people who do a master's degree as a matter of course. I took my master's almost 15 to 18 years after I had taken my bachelor's, and I had become a mother of 2 and had been working for a long time. Because I didn't feel the need to be to increase my qualifications. I felt that I had accomplished plenty professionally and was quite capable of being and had been recognized well. And because of my writing skills, my speaking skills, and my capacity to my interdisciplinary approach, my degree was in science, but I also had great interest in writing and reading from a childhood. So I had wide knowledge. So that is that's why I titled this talk, writing and speaking the vision, because this writing and speaking skills were what set me apart from the rest. Like always from childhood, I always used to win elocutions, essay competitions, stacks and stacks of prizes. But I never thought that it is something that I'll do for a living. I always thought I'll study in science. But anyway, so, and at the time when I was actually wanting to, why did I switch from science, of which I was a very good student, to journalism? Because I realized I had cousins who had been studying in the professional courses and all that. And I realized that there was something amiss in the way the academic system worked. And getting into a formal structure and getting into the academic sphere put you at the mercy of certain people who are above you. This I understood, even due to some small things that happened when I was in degree in the small town that I was studying. So I said, I won't study science. It's too hard, too much of hard work. And you're given the same, if you're a master's, you're a master's. You're a lecturer, you get the same, level of salary as everyone else. Because I was a small town girl, I felt that if you have a master's, then you end up becoming a lecturer. So an MA in English literature will get the same level of salary as an MSc who stands for 4 hours in the lab, through degree as well as through MSc. So I said, why work so hard? That was my thing. But of course, my writing and speaking skills were what actually pulled me into journalism. Then because of this communication, I always felt very confident in expressing my point of view. And there were many times, many meetings. I was a part of so many consultations and, funding groups, conferences, press conferences, and so on. And sometimes I would say something in a discussion, and there would be a silence. And people then would move on to something else. No one would pick up the point or respond to the suggestion or whatever idea I was sharing. And I never understood what that was about. I never understood. And so then it was also this thing, nobody told me when I applied for that position that they will not consider you if you don't have a master's degree, whatever else, however, in every other way you're accomplished. So, and this is only a funding agency, they can easily, be flexible. It's not as if they have some, it's a government norm that they have to follow or anything. Anyway, so this is these are the ways in which my life and work experiences influenced me and had an impact upon the way I thought about things. At one point, there was an opening for a position for which I was actually like headhunted. The people said, you have to apply, you are the right person, we want you to be in this post. It was a central project for empowerment of women. And of course, I had the right training. By that time, I had, of course, finished my master's, and I had the right balance of experience, training, and education. And I was confident of being selected. But after a long wait, then I phoned up and checked, and they said, no, ma'am, we've hired someone. I had actually done very well in that interview, and I had no doubt that I would be the candidate, because it was a small like a patch of like 6 to 7 people, and it was clear that I was way ahead of the rest. What was the reason for that experience? That is when I remember something, that the lady who asked me to submit my paper application, she saw my application, and I had put in the name of 2 referees. One was the head of the NGO, the funding agency with whom I had been associated as a trainer. And I was not on the staff, but I was a consultant. And the other was a very well-known Dalit activist. So this lady took a look at those 2 names, and she said, okay, this name is okay, but we don't talk about Dalit in that organization. I was puzzled. What is that about? Why did she mention that? Because of that lady who was whose name I had given. What is this about? Then I started asking myself, do they see me? Because I'm a Christian also. This other activist is also a Christian, and she's well known as a Dalit activist. At that point, I had not made the connection between the fact that people saw me as a Dalit. That was where I started asking, oh, do they lump me with this lady and think that I'm also a Dalit? Is it like that? So then I started asking. And after a long period of questioning, families don't want to give up the information. My mother, they never admitted, because our families converted 3 generations ago. On my mother's side, my grandfather, her father, and my father's side, his grandfather. So 4 generations on dad's side, 3 generations on mom's side. So they want to go away from that identity as far as possible. So it was a long period of questioning, and finally, and at first I thought all my grandparents were Dalit. No, in those days, it was quite feasible for people to, I'm talking about almost like 80 to 90 years ago, maybe more than that. They had intermarried cross caste, because they had been converted to Christianity. And once you became a Christian, then your caste identity became less important. in their experience in those times. And so one grandparent on either side was a non-Dalit and one was a Dalit. But see, that didn't stop people from assuming that I was Dalit and discriminating against me in various ways. I gave you only one instance, or in fact, two I've given you. But I don't believe that it is so simple. It's extremely subtle but extremely real kinds of discriminations take place, and the silences that I used to encounter, those were silences because the people I was, because of my perspective, I'm coming from a rural perspective, from a woman's perspective. I'm coming from a perspective of gender justice and social justice. Even though I may not have been I would not have been conscious of my Dalitness, I had an inherent sympathy with the lives and lifestyles of Dalits. And so when Dalits or any marginalized section. So when I spoke something that was very different from these people's experiences, because there is so much of elitism, classism and casteism in establishments, whether they are NGO establishments, government establishments, corporate establishments, all of which I have worked with. I must honestly say that I've not had much experience of casteism in the corporate sector because my encounters have not been much there, though a little bit. I worked with corporates as a trainer for their POSH Act committees and so on. But definitely in the NGO sector and in the government sector, my experience has been very strong of both casteism and discrimination against minorities. So immediately once I realized that I was being perceived as a Dalit, that immediately made sense to me. And I decided to gladly own that identity. Many people try to live it down or hide it or deprecate it. Sacrifices their lives, the struggles they underwent. It is what they have undergone on our behalf over 2 generations, which has made us fit in easily with the mainstream. So their sacrifices should not go in vain and should be honored. And therefore, I will not deny their what they have done and who they were. So this was it. So after that, you will notice that if you see my writing, I've been writing from the 80s because I really started. I'm a really very senior person, very, very, very much a veteran. And if at all you come across any material, then it was pre-internet era, but my Dalit consciousness, which was around 2004-05. After that, the quality and timbre of my writing changed. My analytical, I got a new filter, the real filter to understand what is happening in society. And therefore, my perspective began to shape how I saw an issue and how I will talk about it. So that is when I began to really talk about the issue of Dalit women. Not only talk, I used to write. See, and I was told in 2012 or 13, I was visited by a now well-known activist and artist and campaigner from the US. And she said, Cynthia, when I searched the net for Dalit woman, the only name that popped up in terms of articles and all that was yours. Because people were activists, they were writing, they were talking, they were doing a lot of work, but they were not writing for the academia or in journalism. And that thereby hangs another tale. The fact of the invisibility or the exclusion, you can say, of Dalit perspectives, Adivasi perspectives from the mainstream media. Why? Because the mainstream media is clearly another bastion of power, caste, and class privilege. And they gatekeep the voices that can appear. See, why do I get invited so much to a lot of academic spaces and, mainstream conferences? because I'm a person whose Dalit consciousness came much later. I did not grow up with that consciousness. But people who have grown up with that consciousness, their mindset and psyche are such, they clearly, they will be able to, the mainstream clearly understands that they'll be very uncomfortable if these people are given spaces and voices. And as a result, just a minute, and as a result, the main hardly giving any not voices, the mainstream gatekeepers hardly give any opportunity to the alternate voices who are actually, that reminds me, this the importance of words and the importance of mindset. Many of you would have heard of the very eminent economist Dr. Devaki Jain, feminist economist. She had organized in the early, maybe in around 2000, she had organized a meeting, South India level meeting of elected women representatives from all over the south of India. And in South India was one of the first adapters of, particularly Karnataka, of the reservation for women in the grassroots. So there were large numbers of women in the grassroots who had been in governance at the grassroots. So she wanted to have a convention of all these people. And we had people speaking so many languages and sharing their experiences. There were also thinkers and intellectuals, plus elected people from the ground. And I was one of the paper presenters. And the title of that conference was called The Other Voices. And one of the trustees of the organization which organized it, he was speaking, and when he said, this is a misnamed, conference. It says the other voices. Why are they the other voices? They are the ones who are in governance. They have been elected to represent their people. So they are the voices. It's you and me who are the other voices. You see, so this is so. In fact, my paper was also along the same lines, and challenged that concept of othering of women who are in governance because they're not perceived as worthy of being leaders in the community. So these are the ways in which even the feminist leadership have marginalized people from the women from the grassroots who belong to OBC, Dalit and Adivasi sections, but who also have played a role in public spaces much more than these people have. Except that because it is so diversified and decentralized and not in the public eye, their work is not recognized or valued. And so it is all this that gave me the impetus to really become an advocate, to write and speak. This was also a time when the internet was just beginning to become popular. And 2005 or 6 was when I started seriously writing from a Dalit perspective. And I sent a proposal or a pitch or whatever you can call it to one very prominent journal in India, a very well-known journal. Every scholar in India will know it. So I gave a pitch to them about what I wanted to write. They ignored it completely, no response. Then I told myself that was enough. That was one experience. I said, I will never, ever write for these formal journals ever. I will take my material to the people. And that is how I started writing and posting my articles. Most of you would have come across countercurrents.org. If you go to countercurrents.org and go to their archives and search for my name, you'll get dozens of articles, early articles which I have written in the fresh, when I just freshly acquired a Dalit perspective and started writing critically and thinking critically. Some of the material is maybe outdated, but much of the thinking that I still have comes from there. So you could actually go. So it was the fact that I deliberately made a choice to stay away from the mainstream gate-kept formal journal, academic journals, formal journalism, and used alternative media at the same time as when I began to get my consciousness alive. And I started posting these articles. I didn't bother about people plagiarizing my article or the credit that I was not getting or not being paid, because countercurrents.org is also a labor of love by Bino Matthew, and and it has grown from strength to strength, and he struggles to run it with donations. So he's not in a position to pay me, but I wanted people Cynthia, yours was the only and first name that that popped up, and there were any discussion in the net on Dalit women's issues. So it turned out that that was the right thing to do, because 3 years ago, I think in 2018, the same young lady, Tenmori, many of you might have heard her name, Tenmori Soundarajan. She and another friend, Suraj Yengde, I wrote to both of them showing, I spoke to Suraj first and then later to Tenmori. And I said, I'd like to visit the US. And so Tenmori put out a letter saying, Cynthia Stephen, the well-known, Dalit woman leader and thinker, is going to come to the US. Can you, I need you to, invite her. I'm not exaggerating. I got 40 letters of invitation. I was taken aback. What? I'm sitting and writing into the void. But people across the world, in the US, almost all the universities, particularly those which work in gender and marginalization, are very familiar with my material. And so Suraj is a fellow with a body which is associated with Harvard University, the Shorenstein Center, I think. So he had invited me to speak to the gender. He organized a talk for me with the gender students, study students of Harvard, the PhD and graduate level scholars. I had a lecture like this. And in that context, I was talking about the knowledge that our people have, how they make their lives without any reference to any formal structure. So if it's an Adivasi, they live in their forest. They don't wait for any government to, supply them with food or education or healthcare. They are quite capable. They're quite independently integrated into their own way of life, and their knowledge systems are developed for their lifestyle and is adequate for that. And they have more to give than to receive. And Dalits also, their work, they are deprived of, by design, the caste system denies them opportunity to own land, to acquire an education, to alight with dignity, a choice of livelihood. All this is there, but in spite of that, it is their work which keeps this society going, because sanitation work is one of the most critical work now, as in the context of the pandemic. We know now, we recognize them as frontline workers. Nurses and doctors were always heroes to us. But when have sanitation workers been our heroes? But in unheralded, the sanitation work that is done by the Dalits is what gives us all our human dignity. Did we think of it? No. So this is the way I was just sharing that without, and the knowledge of leather is such a critical, at a time when the industrial revolution hadn't happened, it was one of a very critical material for so many things. Wars were fought with the equipment like horses, scabbards, everything, were you made of leather. So it's a very, very important quality, and there's a lot of science involved in processing of leather, which these people had learned. What about textiles? We are world leaders in textile, in yarns, in dyeing, in techniques of weaving. We are world leaders. Why? Our common people devised those methods out of their knowledge of their own local, materials and their ecology, their plants, their minerals. They've devised looms. If any one of you have ever gone to see how a sari is woven,
It is an extremely complex, even an ordinary sari when in a handloom or khadi or whatever, it's an extremely complex mathematical process. And if it's jacquard and all that, there is so much of intricacy in designing the equipment on which this yarn will be, this thread will be laid, and then the material. Such intricate science. And that knowledge is not valued. So I was just sharing this with Harvard, and then somebody, with a Harvard student, and one white lady or a slightly older lady, she asked, so when will this knowledge come to the mainstream? I said, what is the mainstream? You think Harvard is a mainstream? For them, Harvard doesn't even exist. See, I said, I've never been to university. My master's degree was taken by correspondence under duress because nobody would accept me because I didn't have a master's degree. I've never been to university, but you are reading my papers in your university. This is what the knowledge of the people, the organic knowledge of the people, that politics that gatekeeps knowledge, that builds hierarchies, excludes people. I have been working against that in real ways, and I would say that in many ways I embody that. And so that I'm happy to say the same thing here. And so, for instance, I was researching, the reservation issues. I've done a lot of work with the exclusion and violence faced by scholars in research institutions, in universities, and in professional institutions. People who are coming in, first generation learners, who are coming in into the upper caste, elitist, wealthy context in which these institutions run, and the kind of experiences these young people have. And recently, many of you would be aware that data was brought out about how much of it, though the government funds the IITs and IIMs, the kind of denial of employment to marginalized section candidates in these institutions has deprived generations. Like 40 to 50 posts per institution are vacant. Hundreds of posts are vacant. One person in one such post can be the magnet, or rather the engine, to pull up dozens of people in their community, because that will really build a momentum for a lot of people to come up, families to come up economically and socially. But systematically, the denial has taken place of employment to marginalized sections, Adivasis and OBCs. We talk so much about Dalits and Adivasis. Nobody talks about the OBCs. And yesterday, in fact, early this morning at 3 a.m., I was lecturing a US college students, doctoral scholars in a US college, Columbia University, one of the colleges in Columbia University. And I was sharing with them what Kancha Ailaya talks about. He says the Shudra community, that is the OBC communities, because they're widely scattered, they constitute the largest number of population, bulk of the population. But they're because they're so engaged in livelihood activities and not that much into academic activities, the intellectual leadership for them at a national level is lacking. And as a result, they are the ones who are excluded from all these formal structures of education in a very large way. And so he was making that point in another context, in the context of farm laws and how caste equations and considerations have made it imperative for the government to pass these laws so that they can retain the control, political control. Why? Because Shudras are well organized in regional political parties. There are Yadavs, Reddis, in Andhra Pradesh, in Karnataka, we have Lingats and Vokkaligas who are politically quite strong in their areas. We have Nayars and Eravans in Kerala who are well organized. Yadavs, Jats, Gujars, all these are OBC communities or Shudras, but they are politically powerful. Now the existing situation is that there is the Dvija caste, the three Dvija castes want to retain the political power in their hands and exclude that is what Kancha was writing. And so this is the thing. So what has happened is the intellectual output and capabilities of large sections of India's diverse populations have not been mainstreamed. They are there at their levels. They're working. We have people's poets, we have bhakti poetry, we have oral traditions, we have dance, music, which is local. But what is classical is what is practiced and carried out by the elite, and they become Indian classical dance, Indian way of life, and so this is so what is actually elitist becomes representative of India, which is not the case. The organic, real India of the masses is nowhere seen in these, whether in cultural spaces or in intellectual spaces. I think only in Tamil Nadu we see a little bit of that being broken, to a very small extent in Kerala, in the filmmaking industry, I would say. Otherwise, in Karnataka, for instance, there was a huge Dalit uprising, or you can say resistance movement, which happened in the 80s, because one eminent member of one MLA who was a Dalit, he called all the existing Kannada literatures and the literature as Bhusa. You know what Bhusa is? Bran. This is nothing. It has no connection with our real life. Do you know how our people struggle for water and for food? And when a literature doesn't take into account the lifestyle of our people, of the people, then what is the use of such a literature talking about classical stories and mythologies? Those have no relevance to our lives. So it sparked off a huge cultural movement. The Dalit Sangharsh Samiti became very active in those days and even politically became a force. It continues to survive to this day. Maybe not to that, not in that level, but entire generations. 80s means 2 generations, 40 years have come into the state, and a new 2 or 3 kinds of literatures have also come in. Dalit literature has been very powerful in asserting and speaking out the experiences of Dalit. So it is only and it is a direct contrast. See that very, very loaded question. I always come back to that question because it is a very important perspective that shaped that question. Can the subalterns Why the question in that case? Can they speak? Are they permitted to speak? But they are speaking. Are you listening? Can the mainstream hear? That is my question. So that is the issue. So the Dalit literatures, I think, shook up. There were, forerunners. Say, for instance, Mulk Raj Anand, who's not a very well-known or well-regarded author at this point. But I know that he was, in many ways, a pathbreaker, writing about the marginalized communities. Coolie was one of the very famous novels he wrote, and I read it when I was a teenager in school. And so nobody talks about Mulk Raj Anand, but he was the one who wrote about the subaltern life and so on. So the importance of voice, the importance of knowledge production, the importance of asserting what your knowledge is and not being ashamed of it, not being silenced, and not caring whether anyone is listening, but just singing your song, writing your article. Don't care for the gatekeepers. That's the message I want to bring to our young scholars, wherever they are. All of us experience some kind of marginalization, either due to age, ability, disability, or due to region or language, or due to field of study. We may be moving. We may have studied one thing and gone into another section thing in the highest education. So they may be because of being a woman, or maybe it is a man being feeling out of place in another. So all of us have experienced at our own level some kind of marginalization or exclusion. Now, I think we need to build on this experience and knowledge. But principally, I would say, those who have had the privilege of being heard, of speaking, of writing, it is important now that people listen those people who have had the privilege become quiet and let the subaltern not only speak, but you hear, please. Let them speak. I would say now it's not about can the subaltern speak. I'm saying let the subaltern speak and please you hear. That is my message. That is what I would like to share with you. And with these words, I would like to thank you very much for hearing me with patience. And if there are any issues or any questions or responses, I'd be happy to take them. Yeah, over to the moderator.
Thank you, ma'am, for this insightful talk. You have invited us to think about the important issue of knowledge production, how institutionalization of knowledge practices fails to see the writing and speech and all kinds of knowledge produced by the marginal identities.